Well, Rosanna, thank you very much for introducing us and for introducing what this panel is supposed to be about, because it saves me having to sort of reiterate and do that. But it does sort of underline the fact that we were actually sent quite a lot of homework to do and questions to look at and questions to think about. But a lot of those questions came to us before the election of Donald Trump in the US. So I think that since that hasn't really been talked about since yesterday morning, this is really an opportunity to do that in the context, of course, of talking about Central Europe and what Central Europe means and what Central Europe can do for Ukraine. But I must say, it's really interesting as a foreigner being here, because really everything looks so different from where you sit and where you're looking from. So clearly the world and Central Europe and Ukraine look one way from Uzhhorod, but different from other places. I'd just like to say that I should have introduced myself properly. My name is, well, as Rosanna said, Tim Judah. I work for The Economist. And before spending a lot of time here in Ukraine, I spent a lot of time in the Balkans. And I say that because I actually came here from Tetovo, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people here don't know where Tetovo is, and a lot of people in Tetovo don't know where Uzhhorod is. But, you know, that's a pity, because the people of Tetovo might have a lot of valuable insights for you here, and in the sense that Tetovo is it's an Albanian-speaking city mostly, so a minority in North Macedonia. And while we're talking about what Central Europe can do when it comes to the integration of Ukraine into the EU and NATO, on December the 17th of this year, they'll be celebrating quite a sad, perhaps, anniversary in North Macedonia, because on December 17th, it will be 19 years that North Macedonia has been a candidate for EU membership. And that's really something to bear in mind. You know, some of the issues are not so different. Minority issues, of course, but also history with neighbours. You know, for decades the Greeks blocked the citizens, or blocked North Macedonia from moving forward with its EU integration, and now issues with Bulgaria. So much as it might be nice to think of a new and powerful Central Europe behind Ukraine, you know, how realistic is this? I mean, it's clear that here you see your immediate neighborhood, but actually there's other parts of Europe where, you know, there's plenty of examples and plenty of experience to share. And I listened to the Dutch ambassador yesterday, where he said, in very solemn tones, he said, well, of course, everything to do with EU enlargement is to do with fulfilling the standards, and I can't remember if that was his exact wording, the fulfilling of the standards. But, you know, if you live in North Macedonia, for example, that would really come as news to you, because the big shock, really, of the last 3 years for the Western Balkans was the fact that they realized that standards had nothing to do with it whatsoever. If North Macedonia has been a candidate for 19 years, and suddenly Ukraine out of nowhere and Moldova out of nowhere, as they saw it, become candidates, well, that's geopolitics. I'm sorry, that's nothing to do with standards and reforms. Okay, well, back to Central Europe. I think perhaps the best way to do this is perhaps to ask you just all one question, perhaps to begin with, and then we can sort of, we'll do that as a sort of first round, and then we will come back to then we'll come back and ask some other questions. One of the things that we were asked to talk about is, as Rosanna said, is there any reason to talk about something more geopolitical, or a need for something more in Central and Eastern Europe than just large interstate diversity? we were told, we urge you to find out whether this Central Europe can work as a geopolitical unity and part of the West. A geopolitical unity. Well, I'm not sure that it is a geopolitical unity. After all, Mr. Orban bet big on Mr. Trump and he won, and I'm not quite sure that other people in Central Europe are so happy about that. But okay, well, let me start with you. Do you think that can Central Europe work as a geopolitical unity and part of the West? What do you think?
Okay.
I will speak Ukrainian. So, what is geopolitical unity or geopolitical cohesion? This is actually belonging to a certain system which is following general rules and which is supposed to have some common responsibility, and you kind of associate yourself with this unity. But then we are getting back to the origin of this very form, because this form was founded 5 years ago for the sake of helping Central Europe to have a new realization of its framework, of its limits. Of course, it's clear that this frontier sense and the sense of related threats got more aggravated, and now we feel the temptation to just go to our small apartments, each of us, instead of moving towards better unity, because there is always this illusion coming into play that in your small apartment, in your small shell, so to say, you can protect yourself better if just this grief and bad things don't come to you. That's why today the main dilemma for us is the dilemma between two strategies. Is it the right thing to focus on your own being, or is it better to create a community? What is a better strategy for the future? And we can see different actors in this part of the world giving different answers to this question. That's why this is the ongoing discussion. We don't have a clear answer from all the stakeholders to this question. But in the future, there will be one voice that will sound more convincing, first of all, for civil society, for citizens, because we are a part of a democratic world, and this is, well, that's questionable whether we are Western world, because one of the signs of the Western world is to be a democratic world. And in a democratic world, we need to respond to the requests of our voters, our citizens, and they can form their requests in different ways. And we see it in the US. This is the largest high-profile case, but not the first one. So it's a dynamic issue, and I think that we've got good chances to now promote the definition of Central Europe that we consider to be the right one. We may think that Central Europe is a part of the Western world, and it is a community that realizes what is the added value of staying together. Thank you. Дуже дякую. Пане Сушко. Іванно, можливо, ви хочете теж спробувати дати відповідь на це запитання? Well, first of all, it seems to me that at the moment, we cannot be talking about any continuity or any integrity of Central Europe as an ocean. It seems to me that currently Central Europe is rather vividly showing the trends that start conquering the world, that start spreading across the world. And these are the trends of some cyclic return to anti-globalism after globalism, return to focusing on national, well, I would be eager to say interest, but probably it's not the right word. It's not always about national interests, at least on the things that are related to this specific country, because it may be about the authorities or political powers. And we can also see the trends of digression from the basis that enabled the Central Europe to exist and live over the recent 3 decades in peace, in development, in prosperity, and so on. And it seems to me that now we are facing a major threat, because Central Europe may well become the support for Russia. Central Europe may appear to be the region that, in fact, because of its fears and concerns, because of its electoral or voters' leadership and not responsible leadership of its elites, will consider that, well, you know, free cheese is in the mousetrap, and they may try not to notice this, and they will think that it's better to sacrifice something to autocracy, to tyranny, to violence, to dictatorship, to barbarism, to aggression, for the sake of having this illusory survival. And with these actions, Central Europe may well encourage the aggressor to go on to its territory, even without the realization of that, of what the Central Europe is doing. And then this status of supporting Russia may well be there in Central Europe. And that's what Putin is actually striving for. You know, if Mr. Fico is giving some interviews to Mrs. Skabeyeva from Russia and does not think that this is something unacceptable, and he says that he's so much concerned about the new called curtain, Iron Curtain in Europe, he forgets that he wrote the letter to Biden and Stoltenberg, I mean Mr. Putin, and he said that our goal is Ukraine. But along with that, in that letter to Stoltenberg and to Biden, Putin said that our main goal is actually also to restore this Iron Curtain of 1997. He's not willing to notice this, but the Iron Curtain is about the borders of 1997. And it's about showing the fact that Europe may no longer be independent, and Europe has to understand that all those games with this aggressive imperial power that wants to restore its borders, occupying and conquering other states, is a direct threat for Central Europe. That is going to remain a challenge. It seems to me that our panel was entitled something like Central Europe as the shield of the West, right? We have it in the name of our panel discussion. So Central Europe as the shield for the free world. So I think that now it is Ukraine that is this frontier of the free world. But whether Central Europe may well be regarded as shield of the West, no, it's not. And nobody will convince me that I'm wrong here, because, you know, Poland and Romania are not eager, they are not ready to shoot the missiles about the territory of Ukraine when they may well enter the territory of Poland and Romania and NATO countries, and they are still thinking that this is escalation of the conflict. It's not escalation, this is direct counteracting the direct threat that Russia is posing for those countries. But it's much easier to say that this is escalation because of the fear. So Central Europe now seems to be the colander and not the shield. And we have to be together with Central Europe. You know, Central Europe has been in Eastern Europe has been under Soviet occupation, and we, together with Central Europe, need to convince the whole world that this is a threat for everyone. Otherwise, I'm sure that we are going to become the witnesses of very bad processes. So maybe we will already be watching this from the Eden, and we will see how Central Europe becomes the area where Russia has its power.
Thank you very much. András Rácz, Yes, Ivanna is quite right. It says our actual title is From Good Neighborliness to New Central Europe as a Shield of the West. But many would say that that Hungary has not been a good neighbor to Ukraine in the last 3 years, and indeed has been a shield of Putin. Does it look like that from where you're sitting?
Thanks for the easy question, right? It's quite a start. Again, thank you for the possibility of sitting here already for a second time. And it's kind of a compulsory remark. Everything what I say here is only my personal opinion, so shall not be considered as any kind of an official position of any organization or state, including Hungary. So I'm not a representative of Hungary, even though I have a Hungarian passport. Though I will not write like the Mayakovsky poem, being proud of the Hungarian passport, so that would be a bit too much. Yes and no, Tim. Again, the fundamental framework of all the foreign policies, of the foreign policies of all Central European countries is EU and NATO membership. This matters really a lot, this defines really a lot. Not regardless of who is in power, but still it has a really decisive influence. And yes, whatever Mr. Fico may say is one thing. But what the Slovak government has been doing, not necessarily publicly, is another thing. So EU and NATO memberships are the defining frameworks of the foreign policy of all the Central European countries, including Hungary. Yes, Hungary is a problematic partner. Yes, it will remain a problematic partner at least until 2026. What is in 2026? Parliamentary elections. We do not know who is going to win. So after 2026, a lot of things may happen, or may not. But until 2026, so 1.5 years from now, Hungarian foreign policy will stay as it is. It's not a question whether we like it or we don't. This is the reality. Even if there would be a change of the top leadership in Hungary, which is not coming, but who knows, a black swan scenario sometime happen, the Hungarian foreign policy and the Hungarian political system has been designed for stability. There was a case when a prime minister died, József Antal, 1993. There was another one who was removed by his own party. There was a third one who was basically forced to resign. Still, the parliament and the composition of the government remained the same. Meaning, what we have from Hungary now will continue at least until 2026, period. One shall be realistic about that. Still, when it comes to NATO, yes, Hungary has been a problematic partner in the NATO-Ukraine Council. So NATO gave a solution, established an alternative organization. Because earlier Hungary could block high-level NATO-Ukraine contacts, not since the Vilnius summit. Because earlier, for highest-level NATO-Ukraine meeting, all the member states had to agree. Not since Vilnius. Since Vilnius, the NATO General Secretary can convene NATO-Ukraine high-level meetings, so the Hungarian veto has been circumvented. Small bureaucratic technicality, but it matters. When it comes to military cooperation, Hungary, just like any other countries of the NATO eastern flank, is hosting NATO units. There is the NATO force integration unit, like everywhere on the eastern flank. There is the NATO heavy airlift wing, 3 super heavy cargo aircrafts hosted in Hungary. There is the NATO Center of Excellence for Military Medicine. And there are forces from allied countries stationed in Hungary, just as well everywhere else around the eastern flank. When it comes to the US aircraft and other allied aircrafts operating over the Black Sea, they regularly fly over Hungary, sometimes even refuel. This type of practical military cooperation is going on very, very well. So yes, there is a lot of noise in the media, but when it comes to practical details, in the level of military, we call it officially mil-to-mil, so military to military cooperation. Hungary is a reliable partner and will remain so. Political level, that's a different story. But still, what matters the most in times of war is the military cooperation. When it comes to the EU, yes, Hungary is a problematic partner. But eventually, Budapest voted for all the sanctions. Eventually, Budapest actually enforces the sanctions because it has no other way to do. I'm not sure that the Hungarian government is happy to enforce the sanctions, but they have to do it because it's the EU regulation. So please, dear colleagues, do not underestimate the importance of the EU and NATO as frameworks. They really limit the freedom of movement of every government in the positive sense. This is not a limitation forced upon countries of Central and Eastern Europe. This is a limitation taken by these countries voluntarily when they joined the European Union. And just a last remark, kind of a reaction to Tim's introductory remark. You mentioned at the beginning that some people in North Macedonia may think that standards do not matter at all, and the EU accession is a matter of geopolitics. May look like that, but it's wrong. Colleagues, standards do matter. The fulfilling the EU accession criteria is a prerequisite. Without fulfilling the EU accession criteria fully and completely, no country ever makes it to the EU. Again, please make a difference between, and please differentiate between political talk and reality. The EU is an administrative organization. One needs to fulfill all the accession criteria without exception. And once that's done, this is when the final moment of the membership comes, not before that. So if some countries are nowadays, including Hungary, but not only Hungary, seem to make skeptical remarks about Ukraine's future EU membership, it just doesn't matter much, because Ukraine is not yet there. All the criteria have to be fulfilled before the final voting on Ukraine's membership could take place in the European Council. Hopefully by 2030, maybe later. So please, in the short run and medium run, the most important thing is to go fulfilling the criteria, proceed with the accession-related reforms, because these reforms, proceeding with these reforms, this depends only on Ukraine. If Ukraine does the reforms, Hungary cannot prevent Ukraine from doing the reforms. It's your game. So this, in the short and medium run, this is the way to go. And what happens in Hungary after 2026, we will know in 1.5 years.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. I mean, we can come back to some of those things, because I'm not sure if I completely agree with you. But this is a point of a discussion, isn't it? Tadeusz, Iwański, can you tell us what the view is from Warsaw, or how does it look from there? And does Central Europe exist as a serious and potentially, again, in the future, a serious player, especially since the Visegrad 4 group is no more, basically? It's not relevant anymore.
Yes, thank you. So first question on Polish view. I very much subscribe to what András said about the process, because there is a lot in the air about that Poland will be restricting or will be blocking Ukraine's integration to the EU. I very much agree that this talk will be much more substantive when Ukraine is already there. We had last week or 2 weeks ago, we had another progress report on Ukraine's progress towards the EU. There is a progress, and we are very happy about that. The Polish presidency is going to take place in the first half of the next year. We are, I think, very much willing to subscribe to what the Commission said. The European Commission said that the first cluster on fundamentals will be open. And again, this is very much a technical process. This is very much technical. I don't know if any of you went through, Ivanna, probably you, went through the progress report. It is really very much technical, with the grades, with how certain area is assessed, with the grades from 1 to 5 or 1 to 4. So this is really very very technical. On Central Europe, I think this is kind of a myth. This is kind of a wishful thinking that Central Europe exists as a geopolitical unity, or that Central Europe exists somehow. Because, first of all, how you define the Central Europe, right? there are so many definitions of Central Europe. Like it can be this really like wide one from Latvia or Estonia down to Greece even, probably, or at least to Bulgaria, okay? Bulgaria, Romania, the Balkan countries. So there are few dozens of countries, so you cannot simply have kind of a unifying factor. So you mentioned the Visegrad Group. This is also sometimes meant that this is kind of a core of the Central Europe. You're right, and this V4, it shows how it is difficult to find this, let's say, underpinning moments, because basically this is like 2 + 2 within the V4. So Slovakia and Hungary in one camp, and Poland and Czech Republic in the other. So when you take like 30 countries, then it is, you know, this division lines, there are even more division lines. There are a lot of conflicting interests. Take Russia and security. So how many, you know, different stances within the Central Europe you have there? Take China. How many of them? Take the situation that some of the countries within the Central Europe, in this, let's say, the most wide spectrum, some of them are the members of the EU, some are the members of NATO, some are not willing, some are like candidates. So it is really hard. This is my third time in Reopen Zakarpattia. Thank you once again for the invitation. I remember that 2 or 3 years ago we had this discussion, what is Central Europe? And I had that feeling that here, for example, there is this Habsburg, let's say, Habsburg mythology, let's say, or this legacy is much more present. As for me, from being from Poland, for me, I have this legacy, but there is also a different legacy that is contained with Lithuania, with Latvia, with Belarus. Well, Belarus is a part of the Central Europe. If you ask someone in Poland, then Belarus will be part of it. So where is Belarus? Where is Ukraine? 2 neighbors, and what a conflicting interest, right? Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, I didn't raise the question of whether Central Europe existed or not, because when we were given our talking points, I was told we see no point in debating whether Central Europe exists or not. But clearly, since you've brought it up, well, the question's back on the table. But I'm going to stay with you, because one of the things that we're going to talk about, or should talk about, is something which I again will relate to the Balkans. Because please, in this room, don't forget that you've got 6 countries in the Western Balkans who've gone through a lot of what you're going through and going to go through. For the next, they've already been, they've lived through all of this already. So there's a lot of experience out there. And fine, it's all very well for you to say, oh, it's all technical. It's not. The Macedonians, if it was all technical, the Macedonians would have opened negotiations years ago. Why don't they open negotiations? Because they have issues with their neighbors. The Greeks, they arguing about whether Alexander the Great was this or that, and now the Bulgarians arguing whether Tsar Samuel in 1200 was a Bulgarian or he was a Macedonian. Okay, so let's talk about these issues and to what extent they are and are going to be important and impediments for the future of Ukraine. So we have Radek Sikorski, who normally talks a lot of sense, but talking now about bodies of the Volyn massacres of 1943. Is Volyn going to be an issue, a blocking issue, like the Macedonians have had? What do you think? Go ahead. Yeah, I'm coming back to you. Yes, I'm going to come back this way now. Yep, I'm coming back this way. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Like, this is political messaging that is from Poland, and we cannot, go away with that. My understanding is that this is not the decision. This is the political messaging, that this is something really important for us. This is something that we've been, well, in dialogue with the Ukrainians for very, very long time. We've been appealing, we've been very much vocal to get rid of that issue of exhumation of dead Poles for more than 100 years. Because this is not only the case of the Poles that were killed on the Ukrainian territory during the Second World War, the so-called Volhynia crime, but these are also the corpse of Poles that died during the First World War, during the Polish Bolshevik War, in September 1939. So this is not only the case of the Poles being murdered by Ukrainian nationalists. So we've been in dialogue with that. So I understand this this messaging as basically as a last resort from the Polish side. That that Polish side was very much appealing to the Ukrainian side to get rid of that problem and to make and to let us bury Poles that are in the Ukrainian soil in a very Christian way, because this is the tradition, this is the values, and so on. But it did not happen. At the same time, like thousands of German victims has been buried.
All right, but the question is whether, when it comes to the opening negotiations and opening chapters and closing chapters, whether this government is prepared to stop Ukraine on this issue.
This is the question to the government.
Well, I'm asking for your analytical expert point of view.
I don't know, but my understanding that this is the messaging.
Okay.
Right? That it should be done before that. What I can say is that when I speak with the Polish MFA, then this is like Ukraine is one of the priorities in terms of Polish presidency. Like Ukraine is on the top of the agenda on this, let's say, working level. So everyone is asking what can they do for Ukraine, and we, on the top of that, we have to remember that in the very strategic interest of Poland is to have Ukraine in the EU, because this is about security. This is about Polish security.
Fine. Okay, stop. András, would you like to pick up and tell us what you think from the way it looks from Budapest? I mean, with the caveat that you don't represent anyone except yourself. We understood that.
I should really become an ambassador. You anyways make me one, right? 4 sentences, literally. First, I didn't say that politics don't matter. I say that technicalities cannot be stepped over. So for the EU accession, both are necessary.
Okay.
Technicalities have to be fulfilled and political support is necessary. Good news for Ukraine, accession negotiations are already open. So it's not the case like with North Macedonia, which has been blocked for God knows how many years. Ukraine has already stepped over that line, so that process, the progress has already been made. So the door has already been open. Now the steps are coming. And when it comes to the Polish case, colleagues, domestic politics always matter a lot. And if in a country, a foreign minister has presidential ambitions, and Poland is going to have presidential elections in the spring, then of course certain symbolic issues start rising, then of course political messaging starts. This is domestic politics. Which was said in the previous panel, it's very important to have a detailed understanding of one's neighbors. The detailed understanding Hungary is missing about Ukraine. It's a very interesting asymmetry. Ukraine has a much better understanding of Hungary than vice versa, which tells a lot about the intellectual capacities on the other side of the border. So I would be cautiously optimistic about political messaging on the Polish side. After the presidential election is over, this will probably subside, particularly because, again, Polish EU presidency is coming. After Hungary's EU presidency ends in the end of December, Poland takes over. This is going to be the opportunity of the decade for Poland inside the European Union. The new Polish government is going to do everything to show how good they are, how committed they are, how damn professional they are, and how different they are from the previous peace government. So I'm fairly optimistic about also the import, so that the Volyn issue will not block Ukraine's progress.
What about schools from the Hungarian side? The issue of schooling and minority schooling from Hungary and Romania is basically?
Honestly don't know.
Okay.
There are things happening on the Hungarian side when it comes to managing these particular negotiations, which indicate that Budapest is intended to slow down the process. I mean, to give you one example, when the so-called 11 points were presented to the Ukrainian side about the particular demands of Hungary regarding the minorities, the Ukrainian delegation did not know about the 11 points in advance. Yes, there was the meeting going on, and Peter Szijjártó, as a surprise, handed over, yes, and additionally, there are 11 extra points. This is not how you negotiate if you want to achieve results. So there are several things on the Hungarian side which can very hardly explained if one assumes that Budapest is interested in finding a solution as quick as possible. What the reasons are behind, I honestly don't know.
Okay.
As a professional, I know that this is not the way one negotiates if one wants to achieve a quick result.
Okay. Ivanna, what do you think? Issues from the Central European neighbours are going to slow you up, block you? What do we need to know?
We have already seen how, owing to the actions of Hungary, our process has been slowed down. What has happened? Hungary managed to blackmail the EU regarding some amount of money that has been frozen for it. And this process, unfortunately, is not only about our accession to the EU, or our striving to be invited to the NATO. This process is also about many other things. András has said that EU and NATO framework makes Hungary do something in a different way. And, for example, Hungary supports all sanction packets. Well, unfortunately, that is not 100% true, because in reality, Hungary is trying to bargain regarding some exceptions from sanction packages. And Kirill, the patriarch, is not part of the sanction package. Hungary is still the country that is actually blocking the next sanction package, number 15, for it to be meaningful. Hungary is the country that actually is blocking funding the military aid to Ukraine through the European Peace Facility. Hungary is the country that is currently blocking the discussions how Ukraine is going to get the frozen assets, money from the frozen assets of the Russian Federation. These are just facts. And that means that if the other people, and I agree with my colleagues here, see the benefits or advantages for internal policies, for example, electoral things, or, for example, if we are talking about certain major economic issues, for example, Poland and Polish farmers, then it's obvious that Ukraine will see the manifestation of blocking of our strivings. But it doesn't mean that we won't be able to overcome them. It means that there is also another part of this work, because the European Union now has to review some of its policies in order to be competitive in future. The EU has to review its decision-making process. The EU has to review the level and access to the structural funds. So there are many things to be addressed. So irrespective of the fact whether the it's about Western Balkans or Ukraine, in order to be a successful community, the EU has to do it. And the EU has to fulfill these tasks, and that will definitely be the voices in the middle of the EU who will say, that's because Ukraine has a totally different farming or agriculture, and that's why we have to change and to modify our joint agricultural policy. So these manipulations will be there, but our task is to create all the conditions for the countries to see it as a win-win process, as a process that is both advantageous to those who are inside and to those who are trying to enter the EU. And it's not only about security, it's also about economic capacity of the EU in the future. And a couple of more issues. My colleagues have been discussing whether we are talking about political or geopolitical or technical process of accessing the EU. I think this is the combination of all this. Without geopolitical understanding by the EU, what should be done with the attack of the Russian Federation? So without this understanding, there won't be any expansion of the EU, and Moldova and Ukraine probably wouldn't be given the candidate status, as well as Georgia. By the way, Georgia, that was a totally geopolitical decision. But didn't we have something to fall back on? We have been implementing the association agreement for many years. I know our government bragging about the fact that they managed to fill in the questionnaire for just a couple of weeks. But if the work hasn't been done before, they wouldn't have anything to put there. And if the NGOs were not active, there won't be again people who would have filled this questionnaire. We really have something to show, and now we have this report of the European Commission, and we see the promises from the Prime Minister of Ukraine that, well, on the 11th of September, we were supposed to be the members, and later he shifted the timeline, and he said that in 2025 we'll be technically ready to enter the EU. Well, it doesn't coincide with the reality. It is not honest with respect to our partners and our citizens. And at the same time, we hear the slogans, we are on the way, everything is proportionate, everything is in line with the European integration. But what do we see as a result for 1 year? The progress is 0.2%. So it's about us. It means we have to look at the mirror and understand that we have already been given all political advances that could have been given to us. Now it's time to work hard. And we should look at the mirror and we should see our reflection, objective reflection. And when I see that we evaluate the freedom of expression and give the number of points 3 out of 4, my question is, what should happen? Apart from the fact that we have some political censorship, we have the issue with the opposition channels being switched off. We have the issue with non-representation of certain political forces, oppositional forces in the Ukrainian media segment. And we put the number of points 3 out of 4. So it means 1 more point and everything is ideal. So what should happen for us to understand that, well, the freedom of speech in Ukraine should be evaluated 1 as maximum? Probably the digital channels survive and send certain managers, and they're supported by donors, and they can actually do the journalism and do some serious things. So what I want to say, we should take adequate evaluation towards ourselves. And we should not shift the blame on somebody, and we should not say that, well, people are reproaching us. There will be those reproaches. It will be difficult. There will be blockages on our way. So for us to feel comfortable, we should work not 100%, but 120%.
Thank you very much. Oleksandr, Sushko, to come back to you here, let's return the focus to Central Europe, to the neighbours. Are they friends, or I don't want to say enemies, but there could be a lot. Some of the countries could be a lot more friendly. What can be done by Ukraine to win them over as allies, to make sure that you can go at 110%?
Thank you for the question. I think that what Ukraine has to do now is to survive. This is the main task. And everything is subordinated to this aim. And this aim definitely is strengthened by our partnership with our neighbors. That's clear. Definitely, there are some natural discrepancies about the expectations and the interests, the way it works in business. And, well, on our way to the EU, we shall face the competitive approaches on the part of our neighbors, particularly in those areas where we see the objective competition of certain sectors. I'm talking about agriculture, I'm talking about transportation and some others. And we have to speak about it, and we have to clearly formulate our own national interests. Well, there are some issues here when some business groups voice their interest as the national interest, while it is actually the interest of some part of Ukrainian economy. So the first task for Ukraine is to do this internal dialogue with our stakeholders and to formulate in a qualitative way our national interest and voice these interests to our partners. And on the part of our partners, we expect the same. Well, understanding that certain lobby group may be really loud and maybe really noticeable, and probably without them it is impossible to win the elections and to get societal legitimacy. Still, these are groups that represent their own vested interests and not the general interests of the society. For example, when we are talking about such a country as Poland, well, there is the tradition that certain economic entities are more active in public and they are listened to and heard more than the others. So this is the complicated matter, and it's about our internal work and our work with our external partners. There is a high political level, and there are topics that have already been mentioned today. Definitely, Ukrainian side has a different vision why we cannot resolve the issue of commemorating the memory. And again, it involves a number of non-resolved issues, minor issues. Well, I'm not going to provide some details, but it's clear that there are still some things that have to be dealt with by our Polish colleagues and by our Ukrainian colleagues. But, well, on the political level, these things have already been settled. And the only thing is to meet mutual obligations, or, for example, to coordinate what are our discrepancy points. Because, for example, when I listen to people who know the problem in depth, I still see that they do not hear each other. Interpretation of the issue by Ukrainian experts and by Polish experts shows that both sides probably have not fully discussed the problem because, well, the discrepancies are definitely obvious. Well, coming back to your question, how Ukraine can make this friendship relationship even more friendly, I think it depends whether we have this strategic coincidence of national interests. So when we understand that there is the unity of our strategic national interest, all ideological questions will disappear. But when we have the idea somewhere at the back of one's head, let's Ukraine be a buffer state, and sometimes it is even voiced. In this case, it will be even much more difficult for us, because here we are talking about totally opposite strategic visions, and it means we have to take a step back and once again discuss these issues.
Great. Well, that's actually a very good point. A very good point for me to ask my next question. Let's not avoid it anymore. It's the Trump issue. I remind you what J.D. Vance said in an interview not so long ago, where he made it very clear that, as far as he thought, the settlement of the war would rule out Ukraine joining NATO, which is one of the assumptions of our questions and of the last year or so. So, if the Americans are going to push for that, what does that mean for Ukraine and Central Europe? And will the Central European countries be divided over this? And does it matter whether they're divided or not? Because it's the Americans who are going to decide anyway. So I'm going to start with you on this, because you mentioned the word buffer state. Well, if the Americans are going to veto you joining NATO, and presumably with the enthusiastic support of Hungary and Slovakia and maybe one or two others, then that's what will happen. Then you will be the buffer state.
Some Western leaders, and I'm talking about those leaders who have won the elections in the US, have certain ideas or understanding which, from our point of view, seems to be illusionary. Well, people tend to think like this, that Putin probably is ready to make a fair agreement if we make certain concessions. What kind of concessions we may talk about? For example, stop fighting for Ukrainian territories, or remove NATO accession from the agenda. And, well, in that case, Putin will sign the agreement, the war will be over, people won't die on the battlefield, and Ukraine will have its historical space for development, will be able to concentrate on restoration, bringing people back, accession the EU, and so on and so forth. And Russia will be quiet and will live peacefully, controlling some part of our territories illegally. I think this is a very deep illusion, thinking that Putin will agree for these developments. Well, I'm reading media that started publishing these messages, how the American side is planning what can be included in the agenda. It's interesting to read these publications, but just to understand what kind of interesting world our American partners are living in. Well, it's interesting, it's cognitive, but it doesn't match what we can really offer to Putin and what he will agree about. If his sincere interest were to prevent Ukraine's accession to NATO, he probably wouldn't attack Ukraine in 2014 and in 2022, because the issue has already been was already settled. At that time, everybody knew that there was no way for Ukraine to NATO. And even at the beginning of 2022, one membership action plan was not given to Ukraine. So there was no threat for Russia that Ukraine would be a member of NATO. So if he started this war, it means the goal is different. And if we just take one brick out of this picture, well, NATO is not something he would probably buy. Therefore, I'm very skeptical. Putin would agree to any discussions about relatively fair peace when he understands that he is losing and time is not on his side and it's necessary to capture what he has. Only at that moment he will be able to negotiate something. Before this, he would just understand that the time is on his side. It is necessary to accuse Ukraine of different things and just to prolong time, to protract this situation in order to promote erosion of the international coalition that supports Ukraine, in order to ensure the drop of political will to help Ukraine. And he probably will hope that it will happen like this. And that's why I think that currently we have these illusions in the international community. And these illusions are seriously discussed by the experts, politicians, public activists, Vance plan, Pompeo plan, different options and variants. British troops probably will be in the Dnieper region. Well, these are illusions and they mean nothing. I have to provide comments about it, but, well, unfortunately, these are not those things that will ensure peace.
Great. Well, let's. We're running to the end of our panel, but I'm coming back to the three of you, but try and keep them brief. Ivanna, do you agree with that? And does Central Europe matter when it comes to the thinking of the future of Ukraine, or especially now with Trump? Central Europe is A, divided, and B, doesn't matter.
Well, I fully agree with what has been said by Oleksandr, both regarding the illusory and a bit naive suggestions made regarding what could end this war. And I will probably try to follow up a little bit with this, because I think that our main task is now to work with all levels using the national pragmatic, non-emotional arguments to show the value and the unity of the national interest and the interest of each single citizen of every society, including the US. So we need to show why Russia should be defeated in this war. And over these 3 years, we haven't had any political consensus with our partners regarding the fact that that Russia should be defeated. Only when politicians finish their work in a certain position, like Stoltenberg is giving an interview today, and he says that the paradox is that the more assistance we provide to Ukraine, the more active we are now with giving something. So the better we work now to support Ukraine, the less we will have to pay in the future and to suffer in the future. Well, revelation, but we've been talking about this for years. Some of us have been talking about this since 2014. And this is exactly the problem that we are currently facing, because these are the rational things which are easy to understand, and probably people understand these statements as individuals, but they are not ready to lead the society and to make some political decisions on that matter. So we have not yet reached that point when they will lead society to that. We haven't had consensus regarding the fact that Russia has to be defeated in this war, and now we are generally again and again starting the discussion how Russia should be given some opportunities, how Russia should be given an opportunity to preserve its face. Чудово, я мушу вас зупинити, але ви насправді не відповіли на одне запитання. Можливо, так чи ні? Чи важливим є поняття Центральної Європи в цьому дебаті, в цих дебатах? Well, I think that every country matters. It's not about the region, but every country matters, and the suggestions made by every single country matter.
Okay, thank you. András, Hungary will be presumably very enthusiastic behind a sort of Vance plan and saying no to NATO.
Historians joke, you're a Balkan specialist, you already seen a Vance plan, a different one. The Vance-Owen plan back then. That one didn't go out well either.
It didn't work, but it was the brick which led to the eventual data.
See, what Ivanna already listed, when it comes to Hungary's actions, hampering Ukraine, taking Patriarch Kirill off the sanctions list, blocking the European peace facility, a lot of other things. All true, these are the facts. Nobody's debating the facts. Debating the facts makes no sense. The question is not the facts. The question is what to do about them. And that's why I said that until spring 2026, so until the next parliament elections in Hungary, this will not change, period. It may get worse, but will certainly not get better because of the domestic logic of the Hungarian system. So paradoxically enough, Tim, the answer to your question is that yes, Central Europe matters. For example, Hungary is doing a lot of damage.
Okay.
This is a way of being important. That's kind of a negative importance. To be a bit more serious, this is an existing negotiation strategy. If you try to blackmail the other side with the damage that you can inflict, as long as the Hungarian government's calculus is that such a strategy may work and bear fruit, why on earth would they stop it?
Okay, well, thank you. That's very clear. Tadeusz, pick it up there, please.
Thank you. Just one remark to what Ivanna said about NATO. I think that everyone in NATO, like Jens Stoltenberg, I think he was, for all his term, he was pretty much aware what is needed. But it is not the Secretary General who is going to take the decision. He's a moderator. He's like, an average temperature within NATO. He's like trying to navigate somehow in that. When it comes to Trump, well, I think that I completely agree with what Oleksandr said. Let's wait for his first nominations. Well, who's going to be in the Pentagon, who's going to be in the State's Secretary, who's going to be the National Security Advisor. I think the names will tell us more because, well, differences between Mike Pompeo, let's say, and Richard Grenell, like this is two different policies to be pursued, right? Let's see about J.D. Vance's grip on foreign policy, because this is the only name we know so far. And let's see what would be the decisions or announcements after the inauguration, not during the election campaign. When it comes to the region, definitely I think that there is a good time for Viktor Orban now. Because this is the candidate he was betting for the very long time. But this is like in the short term. We'll see what's going to be in the medium and longer term, because this is like a systemic question. How to unite, how to combine the situation that Orban is pro-Trump and at the same time he's pro-China, and Trump is not pro-China. So how to get out of this, let's say, nexus somehow. And again, and once again, well, the question of for how long will there be Orban, right? So we'll see. When it comes to Poland, Well, of course, this is not this. It brings more risks, probably. But on the other hand, like if there is the case that Trump will be measuring his the future involvement of the U.S. in Europe or in NATO by the percentage of the GDP that certain countries are spending on defense and security, then I think Poland is like the bright example, right? 4.7 GDP for defense spendings, and I think this is what Poland will be doing, and I think it will be partnering the U.S. because if the result of Trump would be that Europe will wake up and will find out that the history is not over, that it is continuing, and we see in Ukraine how it is continuing, then, well, hopefully that will be a very good signal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we're winding down now, so perhaps it's time to turn to our commentator, Mijnssen. I don't know if I hope I pronounced your name right. You're the Ukraine correspondent for Neue Zürcher Zeitung, and you are supposed to summarize our conversation. Where are you? There you are. Great. Good.
Yeah, thank you. Is it on? Yes. Yeah, so thank you very much for this really interesting and engaged discussion. We started with the question, is Central Europe, is that a shield? And in a way, maybe we can also ask, is Central Europe a shield or maybe just an open door? Because certainly in the last 30 years, if we take Central Europe, if we also take, for example, countries like Switzerland, Austria, to an extent also Germany to belong to Central Europe, the success of the last 30 years has been in not taking sides, right? I mean, you have EU and you have NATO on the one hand, but in terms of economic diversification, in terms of energy security, there's been a long history of reliance on Russia. And only now, in these last 3 years, are most of these countries, I would exempt Poland from this, of course, but most of these countries seeing the risks and the costs. And I think a lot of what the discussion was about today is how do these countries deal with these costs? How do they deal with the Zeitenwende in Central Europe, which is something that is very much unprocessed in many ways. And I think a lot of the questions you discussed have to do with the emotional fallout, with the political fallout, with the economic fallout of this very radically changed geopolitical situation. So if we ask if it's a shield or an open door, it's also a question of whether Ukraine is actually part of the shield. Is Ukraine the shield for Central and Eastern Europe? And I would say yes. But then that also means, we had this discussion yesterday too about the hinterland, the areas that are not affected by the war. And we see this also in Ukraine, that a lot of regions are doing everything they can not to get dragged into this war. And so, of course, if you're looking at neighboring countries, they're even much further away from the reality in Donbass than we are here in Zaporizhzhia, which is already, Zakarpattia, which is already quite far away from the Donbass. So the question is, what kind of emotional costs does this have? What kind of emotional effects? What does it have politically? And I think one thing that was quite interesting that you discussed is sort of, on the one hand, these rather technocratic, technical processes of EU accession, of NATO accession, of thinking in terms of geopolitics, of thinking of a world region in terms of national interests, geopolitical interests. And on the other hand, you have, as you mentioned, for example, in Hungary, this notion of the national interest, of internal domestic political emotions, which are, of course, very difficult to ignore. So this question of whether this emotional political space and this more technocratic political space can coexist and find sort of together, that is an open question, in my opinion. Aside from this, of course, you have these emotional issues like Volyn or other things like the Hungarian minority in Ukraine that tend to add another disturbing factor to these kind of like rational political processes. So I think that is definitely a chance, though, an opportunity also for Ukraine and for its neighbors to exchange more, to have more of an exchange, to have more of a discourse, because I think everybody agrees that it is not in anybody's interest to get stuck on these emotional issues. And like you very correctly pointed out, this is an issue that can be solved, political will provided. At the same time, of course, it remains close to ideas of national identity, of myths of what a country is. Same thing with the agricultural fight. You know, this is a very emotional thing in Poland. Agriculture is very close to the national identity of what a country sees itself, and the same in Ukraine. So in a way, if there's a way of getting away from these emotional issues to a certain extent and finding a rational approach, that would probably be beneficial for Ukraine. But of course, it's an emotional time, it's a tricky time, it's a very difficult time. So not that easy to do. Thank you very much.
Great, well, thank you. That was a brilliant summary. I finally understood exactly what we'd been talking about. So it was all summed up there. So thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. I think we've earned time for lunch, and thank you for the translators. I would just like to say, if I looked a bit odd sitting like this, it's because I realized that you have to be in exact line of fire of the translating device over there. But thanks very much, and thanks for inviting us, and good luck to Central Europe.
And to Europe as such.
Yeah.